Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this Tuesday, March 17th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Now, I want to get back to probably one of the most important parts of the Tony Alamo story, which I've been covering in depth, and looking at it from many different angles. First of all, looking at it from the charges that were leveled on Tony in 2008, which put him in jail now for 175 years. Most of his appeals have been exhausted, and I've called the legal proceedings, worse than a kangaroo court. And if you looked at some of the testimony from some of the flimsy witnesses and how they were basically instructed or taken into custody, they were taken to play. I mean, they were coached, they were offered gifts. Many have recanted what their statements were made in court, but it didn't matter because one of the things I found interesting in this case, after I looked at it from all angles, was the coverage this got. I mean, this is amazing. It goes all the way back to the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And one of the things that the mainstream media did was paint this ministry out to be a cult, to be basically a place where that would be unsafe for children. And I kind of looked at this and I said, well, what brought on all this? First of all, it's a Christian ministry. It reminded me of Waco in a sense. When most people that hear the Waco story in America will think that it was all Jim Jones or all the fault of the people that were at Waco. And you can see how the news media gets slanted. But when you look behind the scenes in that story, you see a whole different picture. And it's the same thing with the Alamo case. I mean, there are stories out there that you can go to, God, ABC, NBC, all the news broadcasts, Oprah Winfrey, the whole thing. And when I looked at this, I said, man, what is the real reason for all this? I mean, compared to other things going on in the United States, I said, compared to even the pedophilia going on in the Catholic Church, this is small peanuts in a sense. So what was it? And I found the interesting link, and that was his criticism of the Vatican. And if you read some of his tracts and some of the letters that he was sending out, it was very much trying to inform people around the world of what this beast was all about. And having experience with the Vatican, living in Rome for 7 years, I found he was right on track. So then I looked at it and I said, but in America there's a wall of silence on this subject, and you can't get much accomplished here in the States. And as I read went through all the documents and all the tracks, he's millions of dollars spent on radio broadcasts and everything. He had more of an effect overseas and in third world countries than he has here. And the reason being is Americans, unfortunately, do not want to accept the truth about this organization and do not want to accept the truth about the real enemy within their government. And they're going to play this left-right game. They're going to give the Vatican the benefit of the doubt because they have a lot of gold, and they call themselves Christ on earth, and people believe it. So I spent a lot of time looking at the legalities of what was going on here, and we went back to 2008 and saw the raid. And in fact, I was interviewing Tony prior to this, maybe even 2 years before, talking to him about all of the harassment that he had received over the years. And he pinpointed it basically because of his stance against the Vatican on both the secular world and in Scripture. So that was the link, and then I started looking at other people who received the same type of treatment, and it's amazing. A lot of them always had that same linchpin, that criticism of the Vatican, and a large following. They'll let you talk about it in your coffee shop and small venues, but when it becomes popular, they start putting the clamps on you. And when you look at the Tupper Saucy case that I've talked about, he wrote the book Rulers of Evil. The same thing. They start out with IRS violations like they did with Tony. Where are the Vatican IRS violations? You know, if they ever wanted to put, I mean, you could. There are so many loopholes in the Vatican's little empire, big empire, that you know, it's obvious that they get different treatment. They're protected. In fact, well, if they control the courts, if they control what's going on behind the scenes, if they can even control ISIS, which they do, I believe, and this is the game they play in war: create an enemy, and then we fight the enemy, and they get the synthesis they want, getting us one step closer to that one world government, one world order that Tony Alamo and others like Tupper Saucy warned us against. And so, today I wanted to spend some time talking about a real tragedy in this whole story. First, they were intent on putting Tony in jail and painting him out to be a villain. Next, what they wanted to do was to disrupt the ministry. He had several churches all over the country, successful in a sense, where people were living a Christian life, and this cannot be in this country. You've got to either play the game with the Vatican, you stay on their side, the ecumenical side, or you're going to get this treatment. So basically, they create this big, huge image in America that he is a very, very dangerous person. I found him to be completely opposite, and so do many people that, in fact, two or three of the FBI agents, undercover agents, that they could wipe off the books, who had been instructed to go into that ministry and either plant something or create a situation where they could then come in and arrest Tony and blah, blah, blah. But all their attempts failed, and they even came out on my show and talked about how they were trying to set him up. So it's pretty obvious to me that a lot of the information that goes out on websites that are opposed to him and other news channels and other stories, you have to look at both sides of this. It's a little suspect to me. And when you find out how much money is involved here and the people that were testifying against him were going to get a piece of the pie, it's pretty easy. People lie when there's a lot of money on the table, is what I'm saying. And some of them even came out and testified, came back and recanted and said, yes, they did. They wish they hadn't done what they did. But, the government really, they took them into they took people and they tried to, they hounded a number of people to testify against him and wanted them to lie, and a couple of people came on my show and said they wouldn't. Well, in fact, a couple of people that lost their children in this, because that's the next approach they took. The state came in and said that the children should be put into state custody because it's a dangerous place. They'd been living there for 20 years, getting educated, reading the Bible. It's a lot safer than any public school that I've ever seen in the inner cities. Come on. A lot safer than a lot of the places in this world that we've created. And they wouldn't allow it because he was criticizing the Vatican. They had to put this Christian ministry through the ringer. And they did. So a couple of the parents that lost their children said the people, they said, listen, if you testify against Tony and, you will get your children back tomorrow. And they wouldn't. He said, I'm not going to lie. And so that's the point I'm trying to make. There's so much testimony that they were trying to get false testimony against this guy to, one, put them away, put a Tony Alamo away. Then secondly, to disrupt the ministry and and finally they took over 35 children into state custody all over the country, and many of them are still haven't been allowed to be with their parents, and this is going on 7 years. And basically, when what hit the fan constitutionally, the abuse charges were basically not there. There was no abuse. I mean, give me a break. They'll look for any little thing. For example, let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Personal story, and then we'll go back. All right, let's go back to the 60s. I'm 10 or 11 years old. I'm in a Catholic school. My brother is 6 months old. My mother died from leukemia, and my dad was restarting a trucking company. He'd been a small businessman all his life, and we had to move from our farm in Wisconsin back to Chicago, where I was born and where he grew up, my dad, and had a company there. And he was restarting his company when, knowing my mother didn't have much time on this earth. And so when she passed away, it was a big story around that area of Chicago. And I won't get into a lot of the details about the leukemia epidemic there. But anyway, during that period of time, which has been medically documented, we got a visit from the Monsignor. And my dad thought he came over to help. And basically, he came over to try to put me and my brother in a Catholic orphanage. That was a disaster. My dad kicked the guy out, and I've told that story. And never sent my brother to Catholic school ever. My dad never went back to that church. He allowed me to stay in because of all my friends, and he thought it would be too much trauma to break away from my friends there after losing my mother. But, as time passed on, back in those days, listen, I remember the first time I came home, I was 16 years old, and we went out a night on the town, and my dad was trying to make a point, and as I was walking up the stairs, he said, you're going to sleep in the garage. And he pushed me out through the door, and I fell through the door and ended up sleeping in the garage. Now, today, he could have been put in jail, for that, right? If I was a real jerk. Back then, the whole story was different. So where does the right of discipline come in? And, of course, we know that what I'm talking about here, a simple slap on the butt, is a lot different than child abuse. So what I'm getting at here is the state is coming, when they couldn't find any child abuse charges on these children, they had to rely on, what they said was basically, because you homeschool, and because many of you don't vaccinate your children, they're in danger. So they use that crazy argument. They want to get into, government wants to get in every part of your life. And they are. And when you read these cases, which I've gone through all these custody cases, it's just amazing. The BS that goes on, and the state taking control of the family is very obvious here. And they wanted to use this ministry as an example to say to other pastors out there who may not be following the ecumenical garbage that's going on now at the Vatican, that if you do this is what you can expect. So, it kind of keeps people from opening their mouth about maybe what's the truth in the Revelations, in the book of Revelations, in the Bible, etc., which outs the beast. And many people don't really care. Just look at the last Super Bowl, when we had that singer come out riding the beast. That was the symbol. They were showing you right there who they are. And it goes over everybody's heads. But not on this show. We're going to look at the things as they really are. And again, like I said, I've concentrated a lot on the court proceedings and showed you how his trial was merely a rubber stamp of the state to put him away. And secondly, then, I looked at what happened to the children and how they were trying to dismantle the ministry by taking away these kids. And perhaps many parents then would never want to get involved with this ministry. And that was another way of maybe silencing them from their criticism of the Vatican and the Vatican's control of our government. which to many in the mainstream sound, oh, that's really out there, but it isn't, folks. Let me tell you something. I probably wouldn't be as adamant about my statements if I didn't live in Rome for 7 years and didn't see it firsthand. So I'm talking a little bit from experience, not only theory. But anyway, so the second approach here was to take these kids and then to win the custody battles in court. And it's just a mess. So that's still going on. And then the third approach was the civil lawsuits come rushing in and they're going to take away all the properties. And that's a whole different story, which I'll get into. But I want to concentrate a little bit on those families who fled. Their stories, the families who stayed or lost their children, and some of their comments, which I haven't, I had an opportunity to read, and I wanted to pass them on to you, to show you what could happen to you, and what would you do? I mean, the families were, a couple of them were up against a rock and a hard place. The government and I mean, you could see the frame job. Government stating, listen, if you lie about Tony Alamo, you can have your children back tomorrow. Now, I remember when this story was going on, I was talking to parents that were watching this in other Christian ministries. And many of them said, I'll do anything for my children, even lie to keep them safe. So, what happened really behind the scenes? Well, here's a story that I wanted to read, and there's a few of these parents who've come out to tell their story, and I wanted to read that to you because it's a huge part of the case. By the way, Tony still sits in jail. They still get over 300,000 hits a week on their website. They're still passing out the same literature all over the world. And as I see letters that come into this ministry, most of them are from foreign countries. It's amazing. And I'll get to a couple of those in another show at one time. But let me read what Greg Ciego said. He said, to whom it may concern, I, Greg Ciego, hereby swear under oath and declare under penalty of perjury that the following facts below are true. I've been with the Tony Alamo ministry for almost 35 years. The injuries I've sustained in recent years are traceable to the fact that my only crime seems to be that I've lived on property owned by members of the church following the teachings of the Bible. The injuries I have sustained these past few years are painful to even put in words. But feel a fraction of the pain I and my children have suffered, I've accomplished something. For 12 years, all that my children have known is me. I've been their only parent, and my children and I have formed a bond that is very close and tight-knit. To my children, I was their hero. I am all they really have. 3 years ago, in 2008, our peaceful, happy lives together came to an abrupt, traumatizing stop. It started with my 14-year-old daughter, Vanessa, being subject to a SWAT team raid. Many children, my daughter included, were held at gunpoint by these men wearing all black and masks and carrying heavy artillery. All this when they all knew that they were in the home where women and children lived. It was the most terrifying thing these children had ever experienced. They claimed they did this to protect the children from abuse. Now tell me, where is the logic? There was and is no abuse at the ministry. They are the abusers. You know, he's got a point. With all the knowledge and the surveillance that we have, they knew there was no danger there. There were kids playing on a swing in a ministry, reading books and going to school, and parents working. There were no guns there, as told by one of the FBI agents who tried to do that, and Tony wouldn't have it on his grounds, so that they could be declared dangerous, like the people at Waco. But they came in with guns, all in black, with these heavy artillery weapons, and that was for show. That was for media show, because 150 media outlets were notified prior to this of the raid. I mean, what's that all about? How many times are the media outlets notified about the Catholic schools? And how many Catholic schools have been closed down because of pedophile priests? Not one. How much land has been taken from them? Not one. They're buying more and more land. The Vatican owns over half, is the second biggest landowner in the city in New York. And it is so funny when I read, when you get into these, even the testimony during Tony's trial regarding the ministry, the prosecutor was talking to one of the people in the ministry about whose property is this name in? Is it in the church's name? Is it in your? They were going on and on. Do you realize the Vatican property, how much money they have in corporations, how much money they send over to the Caribbean bank, all those banks where they can money launder, how much money goes into their money laundering bank under different names, mafia connections, and that's okay. Oh yeah, that's fine. But for this small Christian ministry, they made a big deal about it, and the big deal was to keep their mouths closed about the Vatican. Can't have it. Not in this world today, in the ecumenical world that we've created. You're either on their side or you're going to get put down. Now, back to what he was saying, the logic, this abuse of this raid. Does anybody ever question that? No. Oh, that's fine. They're dangerous. Bring in the SWAT team. People love SWAT teams now in America. Everybody loves to watch it. Oh, yeah, bring the SWAT team in. Wait till the SWAT team makes a mistake on your house, and like they've done in many cases, and killed people because, they got the wrong address on a drug raid. Now, Mr. Ciego says it doesn't really stop there. I was at every court hearing trying to fight to get my daughter back. My 12-year-old son Marcus came to court to help fight to get his sister back by testifying on the church's and my behalf. Before he was even able to testify, armed officers filled the courtroom and blocked every exit and began forcefully taking my son and 4 other boys into custody. My son reached out for me, but there was nothing I could do. They don't care what they have done to these children. They are the ones guilty of child abuse. But it doesn't even stop there, he says. At the same time, while I was away at court, state troopers raided our properties in Falk, Arkansas, where my youngest son was being babysat. Right before the troopers came, they were all headed to a park when they were pulled over on one side of the road and 17 children were taken, including my 10-year-old son Nathan. My son was terrified. I'm the only parent he's ever known. He needs me as much as I need him. Again, our government is guilty of child abuse of the worst degree. My children were never abused until they were taken away from me. At the few visits we were allowed, my children and I were not allowed to speak freely to each other. These few visits were monitored by biased, hateful state workers. Isn't this incredible? And let me just break there because I'm going to take a short 3-minute break here. But these are the sides of the story you never hear. As you go through, I've gone through the websites, I've gone through the court documents, I've gone through years and years of articles written by the mainstream against this church, and it all has to do, listen, behind everything, peel the onion way back, it all has to do with the criticism that this pastor and their ministry leveled against the Vatican as being the mother of all harlots, and how scripturally it's an unsound organization, and how secularly they infiltrate our government, infiltrate our churches, and want to take away your mind, body, and soul. That's what it's all about. I'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased. It has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, let's get right back at it here on the Investigative Journal. I'm going over some statements made by a father who lost his children during the Tony Alamo raid of 2008. And he's telling you their side of the story, which, of course, you're not going to get on Oprah Winfrey's show when she did it, and on all the news channels. It's amazing. I've gone through, like I said, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010. I mean, when you look at the media campaign to shut this ministry up and down. It's just amazing when you look at all the people that have come forward showing how this was a frame job. And then, you try to tell this to people, and they look at you like, wow, that's not what Oprah says. That's the kind of world we live in, folks. I mean, get these, we create these idols that get on TV to give lies to you, and you believe it. Not here on this show, though. And I know there's a lot of people listening that don't either. So I'm not indicting everybody, but you know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So anyway, he says, again, our government is guilty of child abuse of the worst degree. My children were never abused until they were taken from me. At the first few visits we were allowed, my children and I were not allowed to even speak freely to each other. Now, who's the big brother here? You tell me, these monitored by these biased, hateful state workers, he says. Then my parental rights were completely taken away. Our final visit, the children, knowing this would be the last time they would see me, was an hour long with armed guards standing watch. Can I'm just thinking of this. It's just incredible. And, freedom of religion, right? Freedom of speech, it's a joke when you really get down to it. Oh, you have it, as long as you don't criticize the Pope. Then my parental rights were completely taken away. Our final visit, the children knowing this would be the last time they would see me, was an hour long with armed guards. The resulting injuries to me and my children are beyond proportion. With my rights as a parent terminated and my children being in foster care, I've not been allowed any communication with them for over a year. This is bad when he wrote, so it's been a while. Why were my children taken away? No, it wasn't because of abuse, for there is not a shred of evidence in that regard. Only made-up stories from disgruntled former church members that were promised monetary gain if they would lie and bring false testimony against Tony Alamo and Alamo Ministries to try to put a stop to this ministry. Our pastor speaks publicly on the radio, television, and through pamphleteering of the corruptions in our society and the anti-Christian movement in our government. These disgruntled former church members have formed an alliance with the government to slander the church, the pastor, and its members, using sensationalism in the news media to fan the flames of public hysteria mixed with good old-fashioned bigotry. And, boy, he couldn't have said it any better. All because, and I'm saying this, because of the anti-Vatican approach that they took. And they were right on the money. Let me tell you, they are right on the money. Our pastor speaks publicly, like he said on the radio. I had to leave my home at 303 East Chantel Smith Boulevard, Muldrow, Oklahoma, and move to Falk, Arkansas, where exorbitant fees have been paid to lawyers to fight to get our children back. And that's what goes on here. To fight to put an end to this order that families with children could not safely live on properties owned by church members, and to fight to stop this tide of slander and persecution. Because of this court order to pick up any and all children living on church property, many Christian members of the congregation fled to protect their children from this unlawful assault on Christianity. To try and pick up the pieces, the loss sustained is insurmountable. With most of the congregation fled, having to find housing, means of employment, purchase vehicles to get to and from work. Those of us left, keeping this worldwide ministry functioning, are spread very thin. The physical and emotional trauma is unspeakable and beyond any amount of monetary compensation. So there you got it. I mean, that's pretty well said. Now another person came forward and said, I've been an active participant in the Alamo ministry since the autumn of 1971. This should be interesting. When, because of the evangelistic outreach efforts of the Alamo ministry, I've been given the chance to hear the entirety of the gospel of Christ and had turned my life over to him. I've never regretted that decision. My life now has some meaning and purpose. It has been quite a few years now since 1971. And over these years I have directly witnessed the many troubles and the persecutions this church has had to go through and endure. I've seen the properties and houses we worked hard for, the properties we raised our families in, the properties and the houses our children played in and on, all taken away without justification, and sold for pennies on the dollar. I've seen the many court battles we have had to fight. I've heard the countless accusations made by others brought against our pastors in this church. I've seen our pastor Tony, when in this time of grief over the passing of his late wife, Susan, not even given the decency of a moment of solitude to find consolation, but forced instead to fight legal battles in defense of the church. I've seen him, Tony, twice thrown into prison for things he was innocent of. The list goes on, and all of these things have affected my life in many ways. Yet the one thing that has affected my life personally, and the lives of my children, is due directly to the raids on the property owned by the members of the church in Falk, Arkansas in the fall of 2008, and the removal of children living there by the Arkansas DHS. Because of this event, my life and that of my family has been turned completely upside down. I live in New Jersey at this time. I've been married twice and have 4 children. 1 by my first wife and 3 by my wife now. At the time these raids occurred, we had heard that the DHS was not going to be satisfied with the disrupting of the lives of families living in the state of Arkansas only, but also wanted to see the removal of children from families living in other locations as well, from any families associated with the Alamo Christian Ministry. This warning came just in time for me to take my wife and 4 children out of the home we were very happy living in and going into hiding for fear of what would happen to them. Remember what I've told you about how to disrupt this ministry? It's actually what they're doing. With the exception of the eldest, these children were all very young and would have been permanently devastated had they been taken away from the mother they loved very much and were all very much attached to. We stayed in motels for several nights, moving around, and then into a house we were able to rent. It was not long before we heard that the local DHS had come to our former home looking for these kids. And with the, incredible, and with the police pounding on the doors at 5 a.m. and had awakened all of our neighbors and questioned them as to our whereabouts. They told one of the neighbors they had been schooled by the Arkansas DHS for 2 weeks prior to this of many evils of the Alamo ministry and its associates, and the terrible, terrible things and abuse, even possible murder, we were guilty of committing. Oh, my Lord. Nothing could be farther from the truth. None of my children or any of the other children in the church have ever been abused a day in their lives. The neighbor that they told this to, who has never been associated with Alamo Ministries, has since moved his family out of the state to protect them from the constant DHS harassment that persisted for many months after this. Even the family that moved into the house he moved out of suffered DHS harassment after this. They were still trying to locate my children and find anyone who may be able to point them to them. My children could not understand what was going on. All they knew was that they had to move away from home and friends they loved and were not certain of what was going to happen to them. My wife and I tried to explain to them the best we could as to what the situation was, and that even though they wanted to go outside and play when the weather was nice, they could not go outside right now because other people might see them and cause problems. So look at what they've put them into a prison already, even though they haven't even been taken into custody. Now, this is written by Stephen Weddell, W-E-D-E-L. He says, my little daughter was only 2 years old at this time. She started waking up in the middle of the night, screaming at the top of her lungs because she kept having bad dreams of being taken away from her family. She would be inconsolable when this would happen, and only after much comforting would she be able to fall back asleep. You know, at the beginning of January 2009, my eldest son was taken into custody by the local DHS here in New Jersey. This was the beginning of a 6-month ordeal for him and us that none of us will ever forget. After being put into one foster care home after another, until he landed in one, he stayed in one for several months. He was put into the local public school system and exposed to completely different value systems that he was accustomed to. He's not been the same since. During this time, I was forced to go to court month after month in an attempt to get him back. Finally, after 6 months of many sleep-broken nights, agonized days, and prayer, the DHS, finally in New Jersey, released him back into my custody. They could no longer come up with any excuses to keep him. Have things gone back to normal since his return to me? Of course not, no. We have been able to reunite with the rest of our family. My wife and siblings have not seen our son in over 2 years, and we have not been able to see them. We've had to live apart for each because of the fear the DHS will still take an interest in separating the rest of the other children from us. Does this affect us? Well, what do you think? Of course it does. There's nothing more that we would like to see than a complete reunification of our family and the members of the church, and for the truth to be seen, that our pastor and the members of this church are not guilty of the things that are being said about them in the court and in the media. Well, at least you're getting a chance to have it heard on this radio station and other places that I broadcast, and maybe this will help. I hope so. Now, did the DHS leave us alone even after they returned my son? No. One evening, several months after he had been back at home with me, he was crying on the couch. Someone from the DHS department had come to his school that day and taken him out of class to ask him questions. They wanted to know if he's seen any of the other kids, his brothers and sisters. What are they, these people are insane trying to take away break up families like this. And I wonder what lies are told to them. They're probably just being fed lies by their superiors and trying to keep a job. So maybe, but listen, there comes a time when you got to think on your own 2 feet. Question your authority. That's what I always say in this show. Question your authority. If you grow up as a Catholic, question the Vatican. What's your hierarchy all about? If you grow up as a Mormon, 2 of the biggest cults in the world, check about what they're all about at the top levels. That's your responsibility, but people don't do that. They like to be led like sheep. There's nothing more. He said, and I like to see a reunification and everything, but they're still harassing me. He had to tell them he had not seen them. After he told me what had happened at school and he was crying, he was just crying and saying, why don't they just leave us alone? Life has not been the same since the Arkansas DHS decided they knew best and what was good for us. Did this just affect my family? No. It has affected many, many families that have children they all love very dearly. All of us look forward to a day when hopefully and prayerfully this will all change again soon. Very sincerely yours, Stephen Weddle. Now you can read these statements. I think you know what's really going on. Let's read another letter here. My name is Michelle Parrish. Almost 2.5 years ago, I lived very happily at the Tony Alamo Ministries in Saugus, California, now known as Kenyan Country. And folks, I know exactly where that place is at. I've driven by it many times in the years I lived in Los Angeles. I lived on a large piece of property with other families and attended the Tony Alamo Christian Ministries. I went to evening church services, also services during the day. I worked at the church building doing duties to make sure the church building was presentable for church services, and I babysat children of the brothers and sisters at the ministry. We had miniature church services with the children where they loved to sing the gospel songs and tell what they were thankful for. And they got lots of fresh air, and I had first-hand opportunity to witness how well our children were dressed. Brand new clothes, nothing ripped and torn. The health food they ate was natural and one of the finest qualities. All these things were provided for each and every one of the members of the Tony Alamo ministry, which I, for one, devoted my life to by choice and thankfulness. I was given the opportunity to experience and learn many different skills that definitely benefit me in my life today as such organization as responsibility, how to cook, clean, and much, much more. My schooling was of the highest levels. All of our needs were provided for, and then one day, if you can imagine, the foundation was ripped right out from under me, from my life. I had just a newborn twins, for which the ministry provided everything I needed to raise them properly. When we had to flee our homes because of the false accusations of child abuse, I call that inhumane and abusive. We had to leave our belongings. Can you imagine this, folks? Our lives, for fear our children will be taken into custody and never seen by us again. Which is the present case with my brother's children. They were such healthy and happy kids, and they were torn forcibly away from my brother and his wife. People, that's abuse. I wasn't able to take my crib, belongings, anything from my newborn twins. Talk about starting over from scratch. I had to start a whole new life. With just 2 car seats, a couple changes of clothes, and a few diapers and formula. That is cruelty to do that to someone who lived in a very normal, as normal, if not better than most people in the United States. I was dedicated by choice to the ministry. I wanted to become a teacher at our Christian school, but that dream was also abruptly pulled away. Our lives, our children's lives, were healthy, fulfilled lives. We had everything we needed and more. Now, she says, I have to work long hours to support my twins and myself to try to catch up with what I lost at the ministry isn't easy. Life today is very expensive. You even have to pay for the money you make. So, thank you, DHS, thank you, government, for having my best interests at heart. You ruined my life, but not my will and determination to continue on stronger than ever in the Lord for this ministry that has given so much. If God be for us, who can be against us? We will win in the end. Praise the Lord. That's Michelle Parrish. Now, another letter is, he says, my name's Don Thorne, 38-year member of the Alamo Christian Ministry, as well as grieving father of a 13-year-old son and grandfather of 4 innocent children, ages 1 through 7, who were abducted by the Arkansas DHS after they received false accusations from disgruntled ex-members of the ministry who had an extra grind and filthy, money to gain by jointly lying against Tony Alamo and us, members of the ministry. Consequently, the courts believed these false witnesses, condemning our pastor to life in prison and deeming us, the parents in the ministry, as unfit, despite the fact that not one shred of abuse was found in any of our children. Well, Don, you know as well as I do that doesn't matter when you get this beast working against you. In mid-November of 2008, my wife and my son-in-law were driving 2 Ford excursions on the way to a nearby park. On the way, both vehicles were pulled over by the FBI right on the freeway, followed by the DHS, who then kidnapped our son, our 4 grandchildren, and 12 other innocent children. There are no words to describe this pain, the torment, the helplessness, the anger, and the disappointment of our government judicial system that allowed such abuse to occur. My wife was forced to run with our 2 remaining children that were not with her on the day of the abduction, for fear of having them kidnapped. Meanwhile, while in court trying to fight for my son and grandchildren, I was put in jail for 203 days for contempt of court, for not disclosing any information that would lead to my wife and children's whereabouts. My God, who's the judge in this case? You ought to take him and put him in jail for 203 days. My wife is still in hiding with our 2 remaining children, away from our Christian home on 905 Locust Street in Texarkana, Arkansas. A Christian church located in Falk, Arkansas, and away from our children's Christian school, friends, and family. There's no money that can compensate for all the torment, the real fear we have of losing our children that remain. We've had to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars on court costs and lawyers, and on the relocation of my wife and our children when we already had a home. Suffering did not stop there. My grandchildren were placed with people who are doing everything in their power to keep them from seeing me, their grandfather, as well as their loving, role model, natural parents. In addition, my son and my grandchildren have all been placed in public schools, learning to accept homosexuality as an alternative lifestyle and evolution theory, among many other things that are completely contrary to the teachings of the Bible, and which we hold more dear. Even the Constitution of our country was founded upon Bible principles. Our love of God and Bible compels us to stand up for the truth, and it is because of the truth that Tony Alamo and its members preach that we now suffer, which you read about here. Feeble words cannot describe the pain and the anguish that all of us have suffered physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially. We have been victimized when we broke no laws. I've been working as a volunteer in the Alamo ministry since 1974, working alongside my Christian brothers, putting in hours, days, weeks, months, and years in reality, a lifetime to build and establish a Christian community, church, and school, for my family's upbringing and upbringing of others like-minded, so they, in turn, could have the opportunity to bring up their families in a pure and moral surrounding, based upon Christian faith. Our lives have been torn apart unjustly. I pray for justice. I long to see the pursuit of happiness, the freedom of speech and religion, and our God-given rights granted us. May God lead and guide us and help us. Our prayers are with you, and that's Mr. Don Thorne. So when you're looking at this story now from this side, it makes you think a little bit, doesn't it? And there's other people that have come forward, and I'll get into some of those in another show. We only have a couple minutes left. But I want you to remember what he said at the end. He wants to bring his family up with Christian values. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing. Growing up as a Catholic, witness, being firsthand, listening to catechism classes my whole life. The Vatican loves to say that they are Christians, so they are. But I will say this, the Roman Catholic doctrine is not Christian. And any time you have the Vatican lumping themselves and calling themselves Christians, you have to really basically stop there and separate it. No. The doctrines of the Catholic Church are not Christian. Doctrines of the Mormon Church aren't Christian. So Christianity, Bible-believing Christianity, has to make this division. And the Vatican doesn't want that. And when you start doing that, that's when you start getting in trouble. I know, I've been to, so many of these so-called Protestant churches. And none of them will deal with the subject because I don't know if they know, but they do not want to get into this story about separating the Vatican from Christianity, which you have to. And when you really get down to it, it's pagan. And although the card-carrying Catholics may not think that, their hierarchy is not worshiping the God in the Bible. And so this distinction has to be made. But when you do make that distinction, you pay the price. We're all out of time on the Investigative Journal. Back tomorrow. Good night.